And here we are for our second interview of the evening. We have Orlando Pearson with us again. Hi, Orlando.
Hi.
So, following on from the performance of A Scandal in Nova Alba at Undershore, we are getting on the line from the USA, Dan Victor. Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you?
And where are you dialing in from, Dan?
Los Angeles, California, just south of Hollywood.
Fantastic. And you watched the play unfolding over the web, yeah?
Yes, I did.
Fantastic. And I understand that you and Orlando have some history with the publisher. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we exchanged emails. I was interested in his work since we both sort of involved Sherlock Holmes with historical figures, and I recommended MX Publishing because you guys have been so good to me, and I thought that this might be a good avenue for him. And so the rest, I guess, is history.
Best thing that's ever happened to my writing, I have to say. I'm very grateful to you. I suspect I'd have found out eventually about MX, but you saved me an awful lot of heartache. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Well, you mentioned, Dan, that you use literary characters in your work. How did you get involved in writing Sherlock stories?
Well, actually, I've always been interested in Sherlock Holmes since I got my first complete set when I was a kid. I did a term paper in freshman English in college on Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And they were always, the pair of them were always in the back of my mind. I wrote my PhD dissertation on little-known American writer David Graham Phillips, who accused the United States Senate of treason in 1906 with a series of articles. And he was ultimately assassinated in New York. And there were mysterious circumstances about his death, even though they found the killer. It had nothing to do with the government. But one of my students, when I was teaching in junior high school, said that it had to have been related to what he said about the Senate. And I said, he was killed 5 years later. And the kid said to me, they wait. And so the wheel started turning, and I started thinking that would make an interesting murder mystery. Who could I get to re-examine the murder of David Graham Phillips, who was shot 7 times, or 7 shots were fired, and the gun was a 6-shooter. And I decided I would have David Graham Phillips' sister go to England, get Sherlock Holmes out of retirement, and come to New York and find out what really happened. So I can.
Great idea.
Thanks. I lay it all on my students, and that was my first book, The Seventh Bullet, which was published by St. Martin's Press 20 some odd years ago. And since then, the ideas kind of rolled over that I would find other American writers, because I was teaching American literature in high school. And so when I wrote about Stephen Crane, or when I taught about Stephen Crane and I taught about Mark Twain, I knew a lot about them, and so I could incorporate that into the books that I wrote.
And you've written 5 novels so far featuring American literati, haven't you?
I have, and yeah, Mark Twain, Stephen Crane, Jack London, Raymond Chandler, Richard Harding Davis, and now I'm working on a book about the famous American actor who needs no introduction to fans of Sherlock Holmes, William Gillette, who portrayed Holmes for years in his play Sherlock Holmes, gave Charlie Chaplin his first break in theater when Charlie Chaplin played Billy the page boy in Baker Street in his play when it appeared in England. And so I'm involving the story of William Gillette with the Sherlock Holmes story of the Bruce Partington plans, loosely based on the novel that William Gillette wrote in the 1920s about a murder.
Fantastic. And your novel, you also do short stories as well.
Yes.
We'll come on to those shortly. But your novels have also been translated into Italian. As part of the amazing I Gallo Mondadori series. How did you feel when you found out that your books were going to be in Italian?
Well, I have to say that I had one published earlier in Russian, The Seventh Bullet, appeared in Russian immediately. No, not immediately, I shouldn't say that. But it was very difficult for me to find a copy. David Markham gave me some recommendations for how to go about it. But it took my wife on a trip to St. Petersburg to go into a bookstore and find a Russian copy of The Seventh Bullet. So I feel like I'm an international writer now with the Italian books, and there have been 3 or 4 of them now, I believe. I have a cousin who reads Italian. She's about the only person in my immediate circle who knows how to read them. And if I had enough copies of them, she would donate them to her book club, and they would do an Italian reading, I suppose, of my work. But I enjoy the I don't know, the reputation that goes with it.
Fantastic. Well, we'll see if we can track down more copies then for the book club, but they're notoriously hard to get hold of because Mondadori does this one-off print of the books and distributes them around Italy, and they're very, very sought after. Your short stories, a couple of collections coming out in this autumn of your short stories, and they've also been featured in the MX book of New Sherlock Holmes stories, which was we talked a lot about around Undershaw. But one of your stories was also featured in The Art of Sherlock Holmes, which is a project pioneered by Phil Growick. And
I have my own.
You have your copy there. So it's a wonderful project where Phil has paired up artists with authors' stories, Sherlock Holmes short stories. And you were so enamored with the painting that Andy Pereira created from your story that I understand it's the one behind you. Yes,
it is. I move out of the way a bit. I'm particularly enchanted by the background, which I'm sure doesn't show up on the screen, but it is his depiction of the Reichenbach Falls that appears in my short story. But of course, it has gained its greatest notoriety from the place where Holmes and Moriarty supposedly both fell to their deaths. And it's just this beautiful thing. And Andy contacted me. We talked on the phone, and we were talking about that. And he said he's always been intrigued by waterfalls. He has a number of paintings about waterfalls. And he said when he read my story and there was this waterfall in it, he knew that that was going to be his inspiration. So I really appreciated that he did that.
That's fantastic. The second book of The Art of Sherlock Holmes, which is USA-wide, comes out at the end of October with another 13 artists doing Sherlock Holmes art from stories, and more books coming next year as well, some global editions. It's been an absolute treat to talk to you, Dan, all the way from Los Angeles, and thanks Orlando for setting this up. And I hope you guys will rewatch the Scandalin Nova Alba, which has now been loaded up onto the website. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Dan.
Nice to meet you too.